It's early morning over here, and I haven't really done an update on my project recently, so I wanted to do something fun and take a walk through what I've got so far. If this is your first time joining me on my project update, I'm working on something. I keep going back and forth on names, but right now I keep calling it We Should Watch, which is a application where you can make groups and add media, movies and TV shows to that group, so you can keep track of things you want to watch with your friends or loved ones, relatives, whatever. Primarily, this came about because my girlfriend and I have a list of movies and TV shows we've been working through throughout the time we've been together, and we've done it in a Google Doc, crossing out items as we go, and it's not really efficient, and I have to go searching for different things in different platforms, and I want to put everything in one place for us. So the general idea is have some kind of a landing page. Here's a pop-out menu, maybe with some options I haven't fully finalized yet. We'll see some trending things here. You've got to search. If you search for something, here's what will populate on the side here. Just a very quick little preview with a image of the poster for the movie or TV show or whatever with the title on the bottom. And if you click on one of these, then we'll populate or render a little pop-up card with some preview stuff where you can right away add it to a list or to a group that you are a part of, or click on view details and be brought to an actual details page, which will look something like this, where you've got your movie information, some of the stuff we've seen before, which are up top in the preview card as well. Like these will be genres, year, rating, description, or overview of the movie. And in here we'll have available on with some streaming services, maybe your cast, and then some other recommendations of similar titles. You can view the groups that you are a part of, and if you look in your actual details for that group, you'll have the collection that's there. Same component we used before, we'll have that same pop-up, except here we'll probably have a ability to mark it as watched. That's the general flow of the application so far. We'll see kind of what other ideas come up as I go forward, but I want to get the main bulk of this thing working as quickly as I possibly can. We'll look first at my structure here. So in NextJS, I've got, a pages API, so I'm able to do my backend in NextJS, which is really nice so far. I'm using the movie database to get movie information. And here are just some of the things we're working with. We're going to find by ID. So if you go to one of those movie detail pages, we are going to pass in the media type and the ID. You can search the movie database for TV or movie or person, and then an ID associated with that specific entry. So we pass in the media type and ID. Maybe that'll be params, I'm not sure yet, but in either case, we pass it back somehow. Our media type will be our variable, and our D, I've got a API key that's passed in from my .env file, and then we pass back whatever data we get from that API call. Of course, it's in a try-catch, an async function, so we await that. We've got a number of these things right now with the movie database, where we search, same kind of thing. We pass in a search term. There's our search term in our query string, and then we pass back our results here. Same thing for actors. Here's our movie where we can get our trending movies, trending actors, and trending TV. So those things are cool, but they're not super interesting, at least from my perspective at the moment with the current problems I'm trying to solve. But all these things work fine. We call out to the API, we get a response, we send it over. My error handling right now is very basic. I'm just populating an error message and sending that out. If we have it, I'm not really doing anything specific with it. We'll see what I do on the front end. I'm just, again, getting basic functionality down before I fine tune everything. Things I really want to talk about are Prisma. So I've decided to use Prisma to interface with MongoDB, which is my database for the backend. And this is my first time using Prisma, so I'm kind of learning the ins and outs of it here. And on my schema.prisma file here, we've got our primary model set up. I've gone through a few iterations of this stuff and trying to understand relations. How Prisma handles that was a little challenging up front, but I've got a better handle on it now. We've got some confusing stuff up here at first glance, but every collection in your database has an ID of some kind. And Mongo, when you make an entry in Mongo, it has its own ID that it can generate. So you see under user, we've got an ID for the user, which is we're going to call a string. Everything is strings in Mongo, right? And the @ID means it's the primary key for this. @default auto means MongoDB is going to generate this for us. @map_ID. This just tells Prisma that MongoDB actually uses _ID to identify this key. We're telling Prisma that's what it is, so it maps this value to the _ID. This is a object ID in Mongo. So we say this is a database object ID. Probably more details I could get into from that, but at least a high level overview, that's how that works. And it's just a basic understanding of why those things are there. And then the rest of the things, as you might expect, like username is a string, email is a string, password is a string, image, we're going to do something more with this later on. And then we've got the same kind of things in group. We'll talk about these relations in a second. In group, you've got your ID, same kind of setup, and a group name. And now we look at the relations here. So every user is going to be able to have group IDs in an array. Technically, that's a string, right? But it is an object ID that has that relation. So this is actually in our database as a field on the user. But this line, this groups, which is in a group array, our type, our group type or model, this is where we actually specify to Prisma what that relation is. The relation is on the field, which is a group ID. It references the ID of this particular model, and that's how Prisma is going to make that link for us. So while this is visible in our collection on each user entry, this is not, and it's just for Prisma to understand that relationship. We've got the same thing down here. Each group is going to have its user IDs as an array. This is where we specify that relation, the same exact stuff. This is not in the database. For the media, this is where I was back and forth, and if we have any Prisma experts out there and MongoDB experts out there, I'd love any kind of feedback here. I was back and forth about how I was handling the media. At first, I had the media as its own model so that anytime we add media to a group, we could have a media entry in its own collection and just link back to that. I had that originally. It worked basically the same kind of way, except instead of a many-to-many relationship, it was kind of a one-to-many relationship. But I want this group instead to have not just a list of media items that are in it, the collection of media, but to have the collection of media and a Boolean value, whether that media is watched or not, a true or false value, so that when you go into your collection, you can see what are the things I've watched and what are the things I still have yet to watch. Wasn't quite sure how to make that work and make that relationship the same. So instead, I've just opted to make media a type where we've got an ID, which is a string, title, which is a string, and poster path. And I'll talk about why I use those things in a moment. And then the watched Boolean, true or false, where we default to false. This is going to give me some duplication in my database, so I'm not super thrilled about that, but it's a minimal amount of data that I'm going to store. So when we make an API call out to the movie database with a search, it sends back a lot of data, and I'll have enough to populate all of these poster images and the titles right away so we can make one API call. But if you navigate to your group, and we populate this information here, this was the decision of how many API calls am I going to make out to the movie database and what are their limits. So they don't really have a rate limit, but I've read you can only do like 4 calls a second. So I don't want each of these buttons effectively to make their own API call just to fetch a movie poster path and an ID and a title. But since we do that in one call on the search, I don't want to replicate it here for every single button. So storing that in my own database, just that bare amount of information will allow me to make this populate right up front without excessive calls out anywhere. And then once you click on this, then we can have this pop up, make its own API call out to the movie database to fetch that data if it isn't already available. This amount of information is available when we do our search out to movie database, get enough to populate this right away, and click will populate this. If we navigate to the next detail screen, this will make an API call out to the movie database to get additional information. How many calls can we make, right? That was kind of a lot of the reasoning here in making these decisions. So working with Prisma has been pretty intuitive. Their documentation on their CRUD processes is pretty easy to work through. So here we have our path to create a new user and our next backend. So we're importing next API request and next API response because we're using TypeScript here and we want to declare what those things are, type those out. We import Prisma client and we make a new instance of Prisma client. And this is what's going to help us. Prisma client gives us our type safe stuff here. So we have our create user function, async function that we're calling out to our backend, our database. We're going to be pulling in username, email, password, and image from rec.body, at least how it stands right now. And ignore the console.log stuff. This one wasn't totally finalized, but we were testing out some stuff and I'll handle errors better later. I've got this handled in some other stuff, sort of. All the Prisma documentation has you name these things like const whatever, and then await prisma.user.create or something similar. I'm not sure if that's really necessary. You probably could just do await without declaring this as a constant, but just following their patterns for now. But we call prisma.user our model.create the method, and we pass in our data, username, password, email, image, and we're going to make that new user. So over here on Postman, I've got our path in here, localhost API user create user. I've got our data set up, and here we go. We get our bogus response back. My console logged over here at the bottom, but the real thing that matters here is in our database. Here we go. Here's our new user now in our MongoDB database. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make a group. If we make a group, same stuff up top. Here's my create group function that we export for NextJS to see this API, this endpoint. We've got our try catch here. We're just going to pull in whatever the email is and whatever group name is. So, if you make a group, we'll say you navigate to an interface where you type in what your group name should be. The user that's making this is going to be our default first user. So we're going to find our current user by passing in the email from the front end. We'll find unique. There should only be one entry for the email that should be unique in our database. We'll pull that into current user. We'll make a new group with await prisma.group.create, where we pass in whatever the group name is, whatever the ID of that current user is that we found in our database. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to update that user where we find the ID that we just previously had, and then we pass in the group ID that we just made from new group.id, and we push that into the array of groups this user is a part of. So now we've got that relationship on both ends. Unlike Mongoose, where you would get your current user and then you can push directly to that array and then do something like current user.save. From what I see in the documentation, Prisma doesn't work that way. And instead, we're just going to make this update. If I'm wrong, Prisma experts, please let me know. But this is our process here. So let's go set that up in Postman. So here we've got Postman set up, sending back to our API/group/create group, and email will be sent back, just whatever the email account associated with the user is. And in the group name, we're just calling this Eric's first group. And I should get a response back that says group created. Cool. That looks nice. And if we go into our database now, we look in our groups collection, we see we've got a group here and Eric's first group. And this is the array with the user ID, right, to get that association. If we look back into our user, now our user has been updated. We have group array here with 36F, which is our group ID number, right? So now we've got that relationship there, and I can call back to our database at some point and say, if I look at a group, give me all the users associated with it. I can push those up if I need to. But more importantly, we've got a page here in our application where you would look and see my groups, so we can push up all the group data associated with that when we need that information. If we want to add media to this group, we're going to do the similar kind of stuff here. We're going to pass back a group ID for whatever group we choose to add this media to, and then the information for the media, bare bones stuff, media ID, title, poster path. For Prisma, we have update group where we await prisma.group.update, where we find the ID with the group ID that we received in, and then we're going to push onto the group we found the information for the media. We push that onto the media array, and then we should have added that movie, right? So let's set that up and give that a try. So here is our basic information in Postman that we've got set up that we would be sending back with a post request. We've got our group ID, which is our MongoDB ID for that group. Whatever the media is, we're going to use the movie database ID here, title, and poster path. So we'll send this over, and we should get back a message, movie added to group. Cool. Awesome. We go back here. Let's refresh our information in Mongo Atlas. And we didn't send over a watched anything, right? Because we've got this already set here as false. It's also our default anyway, but I've got it set in both places. And now if we look at our group over here, we can see in this media array, we have an object, which is what I wanted, where we've got the ID of the media poster path. So I can populate that initial poster button with the title on it right away without needing to call out to the movie database every single time. Movie title and watched false. And now when we do watch this thing, we can go back and we can make a call. I'll make that eventually, that API endpoint, to find this media, update it to watched true. And then we've got that. That is the bulk of what I've got so far on my backend. I haven't done any front end work yet. I've just been focusing on backend just as a start to get used to making the API endpoints in NextJS and working with Prisma. Got a couple more things I'm going to do on the back end before I do any front end work, but this is kind of where we're at here. So yeah, if anybody has any feedback or questions, feel free to let me know. Thank you for joining me on this update, and hopefully it was fun to see where this project is at.